Hello, everybody. This is Science Fiction, a presentation by Brittany Duke and Daniel Mitchell. Science fiction is a literary fiction genre that uses imagination to address questions about how technology might affect the future of humanity. It allows authors the freedom to tell stories that are fantastical in nature, but still rooted in our understanding of science and fact. It can't be completely unbelievable, though, because that would make it fantasy. Examples of science fiction include H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's also called sci-fi for short. You may see those terms used interchangeably in this presentation. There are different categories of science fiction, and they fall under two main categories. The first category is hard science fiction. Hard science fiction mostly uses real science in the writing. It uses actual facts, modern theories, and extrapolations about what the future might be like. There are no mystical elements in hard science fiction. It relies heavily on research and an understanding of actual science. Some authors of this category of science fiction were scientists before becoming authors, and the authors that are some of the most famous for hard sci-fi are Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, Greg Bear, Larry Niven, and Stanislav Lem. Another category is soft science fiction. It's less dependent on actual science and includes the subtype of social science fiction. It explores themes that are psychological, sociological, economical, political, or anthropological in nature. It's often phrased as a what if to explore different ways that societies or people could evolve. A good example of a soft science fiction story is Star Wars. Some of the more famous soft science fiction authors are Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, Margaret Atwood, and Ursula K. Le Guin. Now, there are many different styles of science fiction. Some of the more popular ones include alternate history, cyberpunk, military sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, space opera or space western, and time travel. Alternate history uses a change in what happened in world history to tell a what-if story. Examples include The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, which explores a world in which the Nazis won World War II, and Voyage by Stephen Baxter, which depicts the 1986 manned mission to Mars, possible partially due to John F. Kennedy surviving the Dallas assassination attempt. Cyberpunk is another style, and these stories often take place in the near future and show the reader a dystopian world. They're often based on fears rooted in the present day, and technology is a major driver of these stories, including things like advanced computers and cybernetic limbs. Some of the examples of cyberpunk are Neuromancer by William Gibson and Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Military sci-fi is based in war, either between factions of humans, humans versus aliens, or sometimes aliens versus aliens. The characters tend to be soldiers, and the stories are moved more by action and adventure than by more placid devices. Examples of military sci-fi include Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein and Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. The post-apocalyptic style focuses on the end of civilization and what comes after that end. It features dark themes and messy, poorly maintained settings like ruins of cities or communities ruled by an iron authority. It features characters who are mainly focused on survival and themes of loss and remembrance. Examples include Mad Max, created by George Miller and Byron Kennedy, and The Zombie Survival Guide, written by Max Brooks. The space opera or space westerns are sometimes considered one style. Sometimes they're thought to be two distinct styles. Both focus on characters traveling through, you guessed it, space. Both are driven mainly by action. Opera tends to be softer science, but grander with epic tales featuring massive battles, romance, and archetypal characters, and the most famous example of a space opera is Star Wars. Space westerns tend to portray somewhat lower technology and uses themes similar to that of American westward expansion in the 1800s. Examples are Firefly and The Beastmaster by Andre Norton. Time travel is one of the oldest styles of science fiction. It often utilizes a device called a time machine to either explore history, examine the future, or both. Examples include one of the first examples of the genre, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. And one of the most famous examples of the genre, of course, is The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. In children's literature, this is a popular genre. Many children enjoy this genre because they love to imagine what it would be like to live on other planets or travel through space. It takes a lot of imagination to think up these storylines. The characteristics to look for to know when a book is science fiction include the storyline taking place in the future, storyline where the technology is more advanced. Characters include aliens, Martians, mutants, human robots, or other futuristic beings. The plots typically use science or technology and involve parts of science that are unrealistic. They have books geared toward younger children, older children, and adults. A fantastic multicultural text is The Magic Mirror by Zetta Elliott. It focuses on a young girl who was bullied at school but receives comfort from her grandmother, who makes her clean a family heirloom. But this isn't just any heirloom, it's a mirror with magical powers. It shows her brave girls and women from the past who faced many challenges but never gave up hope. She draws strength from these women and loses the self-doubt she was feeling. This is considered a time travel science fiction novel because the young girl travels back in time and is not just a passive observer because the people she is seeing also see her and acknowledge her. This text is aimed for young readers and lets them look past their own spaces and into other lives. It also celebrates strong Black women and girls through history. Some examples of text for younger children. If You Decide to Go to the Moon by Faith McNulty. This book allows children to imagine what it would be like for average people to be able to live on the moon. It also includes what they should bring with them and what space travel feels like. Space Guys by Martha Weston. This book involves a fun story about aliens landing outside a boy's bedroom, but they come in and cause havoc inside the house as the boy leads them around. It has a rhyming scheme which should be appealing for young children. Text for older children. George's Secret Key to the Universe by Stephen Hawking. This book is about a father and daughter duo who travel through space with their supercomputer named Cosmos. This story is imaginative, but includes many real-life space concepts that are explored. A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. This book is about a brother, sister, and friend on the search for their missing father, who discovered a new planet 5 years ago. They are joined by mysterious astronomical travelers. This book was also made into a movie that children could watch after they read the book and compare them.
Hi, so the book I'm going to be reading is George's Secret Key to the Universe by Stephen Hawking. We're going to pick up on chapter 19 because that's where our activity takes place. When we go over the activity, you'll understand why. So chapter 19 says, At lunchtime on Monday, George was sitting quietly in the school cafeteria, minding his own business. He got out his lunchbox and looked inside it, wishing he could have bags of chips or chocolate bars or an orange soda like the other kids. Instead, he had a spinach sandwich, a hard-boiled egg, yet more broccoli muffins, and some apple juice pressed by his mother. He took a large bite of his sandwich and sighed. He wished his parents would understand he wanted to save the planet as much as they did, but he wanted to do it in his own way. It was all very well for his parents to lead their alternative lifestyles because they only hung around with their friends, who were just like them. They didn't have to go to school every day with people like Ringo and his gang laughing at them because they wore funny clothes and ate different food and didn't know what happened yesterday on the television. He tried to explain this to his dad, but all he heard back was, "We all have to do our part, George, if we're going to save the earth." George knew this was true. He just thought it was unfair and rather pointless that his part meant him being a laughingstock at school and not having a computer at home. He tried to explain to his parents how useful a computer could be. "But Dad," he had pointed out, "there's stuff you could do with a computer too. Stuff that would help you with your work. I mean, you could get lots of information from the internet and organize your marches with an email. I could get it all set up for you and show you how." George had gazed hopefully at his dad. He thought he saw a spark of interest in his dad's eyes, but it flickered and died. "I don't want to talk about it anymore," his dad said. "We're not getting a computer, and that's final." That thought, George, as he had tried to swallow his lump of spinach sandwich, was why he had liked Eric so much. Eric had listened to George's questions and given him honest replies. Once that made sense to George. George wondered if he dared stop by and see Eric later that afternoon. There was so much he wanted to ask him, and he also really wanted Eric to check his talk for the competition. But just before lunch, he had finally summoned up the courage to sign up on the board for the science competition, the one with a computer as the first prize. Under topic, he had written, "My Amazing Rock from Outer Space." It looked great as a title, although George still wasn't sure his talk was any good. He had taken his lucky rock from outer space out of his pocket while he stood in front of the bulletin board, but to his horror had found it crumbling into dust. It was his lucky charm, the little piece of the solar system he had picked up near Saturn. The principal had been delighted to see George writing his name on the board. He had bounced up as George filled out the form. "There you go, George, that's the spirit. We'll show them, won't we?" He beamed at George. "We can't just let Manor Park walk away with every trophy in the area, can we now?" Manor Park was a private school that hogged all the prizes and won all of the sports matches with boring regularity. "Yes, sir," said George, trying to stuff his outer space rock back into his pocket, but the sharp-eyed principal spotted it. "Oh dear, a handful of dirt," he said, grabbing a nearby trash can. "Toss it in here, George. We can't have you going off to lunch with a pocket full of dust." When George just stood there, rooted to the spot, the principal rattled the can impatiently under his nose. "I was just the same as a boy," he said, claimed George doubted. As far as he was concerned, the principal had never been a boy. He had been a boring wearing a suit and making enthusiastic comments about the under-12 football league, pockets full of nonsense, drop it and off you go kind of guy. Reluctantly, George dropped the gray, crumbly remains of his most treasured possession into the can. He promised himself he would come back later and try and save it. As George munched his way through his sandwich, he thought about Eric in outer space and the competition the next day. While he was thinking, a hand crept over his shoulder and snatched a muffin out of his lunchbox. "Yum, looks so good," said Ringo's voice behind him. George's famous muffins. Ringo took a large bite, made a spluttering sound as he spat it out. George didn't need to look around to know that the whole dining room would be staring in his direction and snickering. "Ugh, that's gross," said Ringo, making fake gagging sounds behind him. "Let's see if the rest is just as horrible." His hand made another dive for George's lunch, but George had had enough. As Ringo's big paw rooted inside the handmade wooden box in which he kept his sandwiches, George slammed the lid down on his fingers. "Ow! Ow!" squealed Ringo. "Ow! Ow!" George opened the box again, allowing Ringo to pull out his hand. "What's all this noise?" said the teacher on the lunchroom duty. Walking over, "Can't you boys manage to do anything without causing trouble?" "Sir, Dr. Reaper, sir," screeched Ringo, who was cradling his damaged hand. "I was just asking George what he had for lunch when he attacked me, sir." "You'd better give him double detention, sir, for the rest of the term. He's broken my hand, sir." Ringo smirked at Dr. Reaper, who gave him a cool glance. "Very well, Richard," he said. "Go and see the school nurse, and come to my room when she's looked at your hand. I'll deal with George." He ordered him away with a point of his finger, and Ringo slouched away, grinning to himself. The rest of the dining room had fallen silent, while they waited for Dr. Reaper to announce George's punishment. But Dr. Reaper surprised them. Instead of giving George an earful, he just sat down next to him on a long bench. "Go on." He waved a red hand at the rest of the room. "Get on with your lunches. The bell will ring soon enough, you know." After a couple of seconds, the usual hubbub started up again, as everyone lost interest in George and went back to his or her conversations. "So, George," said Dr. Reaper, chummily. "Yes, Dr. Reaper?" asked George nervously. "How are you?" Dr. Reaper sounded as though he really wanted to know. "Oh, fine," said George, somewhat taken aback. "How are things at home?" They're okay," said George cautiously, hoping Reaper wasn't going to ask him about Cosmos. "And how about your neighbor?" said Dr. Reaper, trying and failing to sound casual. "Have you ever seen him lately? Is he around at the moment? Or perhaps he has gone away?" George tried to figure out what answer Dr. Reaper wanted so he could give him the opposite one. "Perhaps people on the street are wondering where he's gone," went on Dr. Reaper, sounding spookier and spookier. "Maybe it seems that he has just disappeared, vanished from view. No idea where he might be. Is that it?" He peered hopefully at George, who was now convinced that there was something very wrong with Dr. Reaper. Almost as though, Dr. Reaper sketched a shape in the air with his hands, he just flew off into outer space and never came back. What about that, George? Is that what happened, would you say?" The teacher was gazing at George, obviously wanting to hear that Eric had somehow melted away into thin air. "Actually," said George, "I saw him this morning." He hadn't, but it seemed very important to tell Dr. Reaper he had. "Drat!" muttered Dr. Reaper angrily, suddenly getting out to his feet. "Miserable boys!" He walked off without even bothering to say goodbye. George closed up his lunchbox and decided to head back to the bulletin board so that he could look for his rock in the trash can. As he hurried down the corridor, he passed Dr. Reaper's office. He heard raised voices and stopped to listen through the door for a second. "I told you to deliver the note," rasped the familiar voice of Dr. G. Reaper. "We did," whined a boy's voice, which sounded all too like Ringo's. "You couldn't have," insisted Dr. Reaper. "You just couldn't have." George would have stayed to listen longer, but then the bell rang and he desperately wanted to find his special outer space rock before class began. However, when he got back to the can, it had been emptied. There was only a clean plastic liner inside it. Saturn's mini moon had gone. So we're going to stop with that chapter. So that was just one of the chapters in George's Secret Key to the Universe. It's pretty far into the book, so the characters have already been established. But this chapter was important because I wanted them to hear George's parents' point of view on technology, because the students are going to be working on a question and activity that involves using technology to get your ideas heard. So you guys can hear about that next.
This activity is related to the themes of science fiction and specifically to the book that was just read, and it builds upon standard LAFS.5.SL.2.4. After reading chapter 19 and hearing how George tries to explain how effective technology is today and how it could help his dad with his work, have students think of a social or ecological cause that they would like to help. Then have the students list 4 ways they could use computers or another form of technology to raise awareness or make their activism more effective. They can complete research to help support their plan. Then have students share their ideas with the class. They will share their ideas using the research they have found and provide details about how they will carry this plan out. By having students focus on how to make an impact using computers or another form of technology, they are using the advancing technology that the future will rely on. Technology is a key element in science fiction. Science fiction texts also include a human element, explaining what effect new discoveries, happenings, and scientific developments will have on humanity in the future. Students making plans for the future is the human element that also connects this activity to science fiction. The plan they create could help make positive discoveries or developments for their cause. This activity gets students thinking of positive ways to make changes around them. For students that need assistance with completing this, they can use speech to text or work with a partner to help complete their plan. Here is the works cited